Have you ever felt abandoned by life? Like everything you cherished was suddenly taken away, leaving you with nothing but broken pieces? I was once a wife, a daughter-in-law, a woman full of hope. And then, I lost it all. My name is Ruth, and this is my story. A story of love, loss, and a decision that changed the course of history. They say love is the greatest gift, but they never warn you of the pain it leaves when it's gone. If I had known how quickly joy could turn to sorrow, would I have loved any less? No, I would have loved even more. My name is Ruth. I was born in Moab, a land filled with traditions I once believed would shape my entire life. My people worshipped gods carved from stone, prayed to deities whose faces were unchanging. I lived in a world that was predictable, where the seasons followed their course and where a woman's future was dictated by the men in her life, her father, her husband, her sons. Then everything changed. I met Mahlon, an Israelite who had come to Moab with his family, fleeing famine in his homeland. I had never met a man quite like him. His eyes held stories of a people who worshipped a God who had no statue, no image, and yet his faith in this unseen God was stronger than anything I had ever known. When Mahlon took me as his wife, he did more than bring me into his family. He brought me into a new way of believing. Naomi, my mother-in-law, became like a second mother to me. She was wise, gentle, and her presence filled our home with warmth. Life was good. We were not wealthy, but we had enough, and for me, love was all that mattered. But love is fragile. First, Naomi's husband, Elimelech, died. It was as though the pillar of her world crumbled before our eyes, but we still had Mahlon and his brother. We still had hope. Then Mahlon's brother died, and then Mahlon himself, my Mahlon. In the space of a few years, death stole everything from us. Naomi, Orpah, and I were left as three widows in a world where widows had no future, no husbands to provide for us, no sons to protect us. We were nothing, and so Naomi made a decision that would change everything. They told me to go back. They told me I had a choice. But sometimes a choice isn't really a choice at all. Sometimes the heart already knows where it belongs. Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem, the land of her people. She had nothing left in Moab, no reason to stay. But what about Orpah and me? She urged us to go back to our families, to find new husbands, to rebuild our lives in the only way that made sense. I watched Orpah weep as she embraced Naomi one last time. With one last sorrowful glance, she turned and disappeared into the land that had always been hers. She made the logical choice, the easy choice, but my feet did not move. Naomi looked at me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Go back, Ruth," she pleaded. "There is nothing for you in Bethlehem. You will be a foreigner there, an outcast. You are young. You can start anew." I took her hands in mine. My heart thundered in my chest, but my voice did not waver. "Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you," I said. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord deal with me severely if anything but death separates us." Tears filled her eyes. She said nothing, only pulled me close. And so, we left together. The road to Bethlehem was long. The heat of the sun beat down upon us, dust clinging to our clothes. We walked in silence, lost in thought. What lay ahead? Would I truly be accepted in Naomi's land? Would I always be seen as an outsider, a Moabite? I had given up everything for this woman I called my mother. And yet, I did not regret it, for I knew in my heart that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Have you ever walked into a place where every eye is watching but no one welcomes you? I was a foreigner, an outcast, a woman with nothing to offer, and yet I refused to disappear. Bethlehem, a land I had never known, filled with people who had never known me. The moment we arrived, I could feel the weight of their stares, the whispers barely concealed behind cupped hands. "Is this Naomi?" they murmured, "the one who left in plenty and returned with nothing? And who is this Moabite woman with her?" I lowered my eyes but did not falter. I had chosen this path. I had sworn to follow Naomi, and I would not let fear drive me away. But our stomachs were empty. our hands void of anything to trade. We had no land, no income, no way to survive. Naomi spoke of a tradition in Israel, gleaning. The poorest among the people were allowed to follow behind the harvesters in the fields, gathering whatever grain was left behind. It was no work for a noblewoman, but I was no noblewoman. I was a widow, an outsider, and I needed to feed Naomi. So I went to the fields. The sun beat down on my back as I bent low, gathering the fallen stalks of barley. My hands, unused to such labour, grew sore, my fingers raw, but I pressed on, determined. Every handful of grain was one more meal for Naomi and me. The field belonged to a man named Boaz. I did not know him, but I felt his presence before I saw him. A voice, strong yet kind, spoke among the workers. "The Lord be with you," he greeted them. "The Lord bless you," they answered. Then his gaze found me. "Who is this young woman?" he asked. The foreman explained who I was, a Moabite woman who had come with Naomi, a stranger among them. Boaz did not turn me away. Instead, he approached me, his voice steady, his words unexpected. "Listen to me, my daughter. Do not go and glean in another field, and do not leave this place. Stay here with my servant girls. I have ordered the men not to touch you. When you are thirsty, drink from the water jars they have filled." I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by his kindness. "Why have I found favour in your eyes, my lord, that you should take notice of me, a foreigner?" Boaz smiled. "I have heard of all you have done for Naomi, how you left your homeland and your people to come to a place you did not know. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully." Tears filled my eyes. I had expected rejection, and instead, I found grace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I gathered what I had gleaned and returned to Naomi. When she saw the abundance of barley, her eyes widened in shock. "Where did you work today? Who took notice of you?" "His name is Boaz," I said. Naomi's expression changed, a flicker of hope lighting her tired features. "Boaz is one of our kinsman redeemers," she whispered. And so, for the first time since arriving in Bethlehem, I allowed myself to hope. Sometimes fate is a whisper, sometimes it is a storm, and sometimes it is a man who looks at you as if you are worth something, even when the world says you are not. Boaz. His name had taken root in my heart, an unfamiliar warmth growing each time I saw him in the fields. He was kind, generous, and yet he was more than that. Days passed, then weeks. Each morning I returned to his fields, gleaning from the harvesters, but more than that, I began to watch him, the way he treated his workers, the reverence in his voice when he spoke of the Lord. Naomi saw it too. One evening, as I returned home, she pulled me aside, her eyes bright with something I had not seen in them for a long time, hope. "My daughter," she said softly, "it is time for you to seek rest, to seek a home where you will be cared for. Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. It is time to make it known that you are willing." Her plan startled me. Go to Boaz at night? Lay at his feet? It seemed bold, unthinkable. But I trusted Naomi, and I trusted the Lord. That night I bathed, anointed myself, and put on my best cloak. My heart pounded as I made my way to the threshing floor, where Boaz was sleeping after a long day of winnowing barley. In the moonlight, I knelt beside him, my hands trembling as I uncovered his feet. Slowly, he stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment I saw confusion, then recognition, then something else. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am Ruth, your servant," I whispered. "Spread your garment over me, for you are a redeemer." Silence stretched between us. My heart pounded in my chest. Then a slow smile formed on his lips. "You have shown more kindness now than in the beginning, not going after younger men. Do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask." Relief flooded me. But then his expression darkened. "There is one closer in relation than I," he admitted. "He has the first right to redeem you. I must speak with him first. If he refuses, then as surely as the Lord lives, I will redeem you." I nodded. though my heart ached with uncertainty. Would this other man claim me? Would Boaz truly fight for me? As I lay awake, waiting for dawn, one thought filled my mind. I had come to Bethlehem with nothing, but here in the presence of Boaz, I found myself longing for more than just survival. I longed for a future, a home, a love that would not fade, and I prayed that the Lord would grant me that future with him. There are moments in life when you must risk everything for a chance at something greater. As the sky began to pale with the coming dawn, he sent me away before others could see me, filling my cloak with barley as a gift for Naomi. When I returned home, Naomi was waiting. The moment she saw the grain, she knew. Boaz will not rest until the matter is settled today, she said. And so I waited for the decision that would shape my future. Hope is a fragile thing, but in the hands of the right person, it can become a future. The morning air was thick with anticipation. Naomi and I had no choice but to wait. Boaz had gone to the city gate, the place where judgments were made, where business was settled. Would the other kinsman redeemer take his right, claiming the land of Naomi's family? Would he claim me? I did not know this man. I did not love him. But if he chose to redeem Naomi's land, I would be his wife. Such was the law of Israel. I tried to busy myself, but my hands were unsteady. Each moment felt like an eternity. Then, at last, Boaz returned, and his face told me everything. He has refused, he said simply, his voice filled with quiet triumph. He did not want to risk his own inheritance. So before the elders of the city, he removed his sandal and gave it to me. The right of redemption is now mine. A breath I had not realized I was holding escaped me. Naomi grasped my hands in hers, her eyes shining with tears. Boaz has redeemed us, she whispered. You are to be his wife. Days later, the wedding was set, and I became Ruth, wife of Boaz. No longer a widow, no longer an outsider, no longer uncertain of my place in the world. Our home was filled with joy, laughter, and hope, but the greatest blessing was yet to come. In time, I bore a son, Obed. The women of Bethlehem rejoiced, calling him a restorer of life to Naomi, a future for our family name. Little did they know that Obed would one day be the grandfather of Israel's greatest king, David. I had come to Bethlehem with nothing. Now I was part of a legacy that would shape the future of God's people. Because I chose loyalty, because I chose faith, because I chose to follow the path that God had laid before me. They say history remembers kings and warriors, but sometimes history is shaped by a single choice made by a single woman. I never set out to be remembered. I never dreamed of a legacy or imagined that my name would be spoken beyond my time. All I wanted was to be faithful, to Naomi, to Boaz, to the God who had guided me through every trial. As Obed grew, so did our family's blessings. He was raised in the ways of the Lord, a child of promise, a symbol of God's faithfulness. And when Obed grew, he too had a son, Jesse. And Jesse, he had a son who would change the fate of Israel forever. His name was David, the shepherd who would become a king, a Moabite woman, a foreigner, a widow with no future. I had become part of the royal lineage of Israel, the great-grandmother of a king. And through him, generations later, the line of David would bring forth the greatest of all redeemers, the Messiah himself. All of it because I chose to follow Naomi, because I chose faith over fear, because I chose to trust the God of Israel, the one who never abandoned me. Some choices seem small in the moment, but in the hands of God, they can shape the destiny of nations. I was never meant to be here. A Moabite had no place in Israel. A widow had no future without a husband. A foreigner had no claim to the blessings of God's chosen people. But God had other plans. He saw me, not as the world saw me, but as He intended me to be. He used my loyalty, my love, my faith, and turned it into something greater than I could have ever imagined. Through my son, my grandson, and the generations that followed, He crafted a legacy that reached beyond my own life. My story is not just one of love and redemption, it is a story of purpose, of faith rewarded, of how even the smallest act of devotion can ripple across time in ways we cannot see. So I ask you now, what choices are you making? Are they led by fear or by faith? Are you trusting in what you can see, or in the unseen hand of the one who weaves all things together? I was Ruth, a simple woman from Moab, and yet my story became part of something eternal, and so can yours.